Good morning, and welcome to Talk of the Town on 99.7, 1450 WHTC and WHTC.com.
Welcome you to Talk of the Town for this Friday, September 11th. I'm Gary Stevens. We'll be open line a little bit after 10 o'clock, perhaps. All depends on timing, and we're going to try to get perhaps Mr. President Trump's and Mr. Joe Biden's remarks. They're supposed to appear together in Shanksville, Pennsylvania on this 9/11 commemoration day 19 years ago. If we do have comments from one or both, we will air them a little after 10 o'clock this morning. We'll also have Patty Vandenberg in about an hour with what's new around Holland, and then we'll be joined in the 10:30 segment by Allegan County Commissioner or Commissioners Jim Story and or Dean Capinga. But on this second Friday of the month, it is Ask the Attorney. We alternate between Ken Bazicki of Ken Bazicki Law and Nathan Bocks of Central Park Law here in Holland to answer your legal questions, mostly probate, not criminal, because they do not deal with criminal matters. Not only do they not deal with them as clients, they don't want to be involved directly in criminal matters as well. But when we do have Nathan Bocks joins us, as he does today, we ask that you keep the questions to his day job. We don't need to. We will have plenty of opportunities later on to talk about him as the mayor of Holland, Michigan. But he is on the other side of our Zoom connection. Nathan, good morning and welcome back to WHTC.
Good morning, Gary. It's always great to be here.
Appreciate that. But first of all, before we talk about some of the legal matters, we need to touch upon this day, September 11th. Where were you? What was going through your mind on this particular day 19 years ago?
I was actually found out a little bit later than most people did because I had an early morning and long meeting with a client. And by the time I got out of the meeting, both towers had already come down. But the significance for me for this day, while it's a solemn day, it's always been a solemn day. There's a significance to this day in our family that actually brings a whole lot of joy. We were in the process of adopting a little girl from South Korea, and we'd been in that process for about a year and a half. And it was on this day, on September 11, 2001, that her picture and her biography came from South Korea. We didn't find out on September 11 because in the chaos of that day, Bethany Christian Services wasn't able to get a hold of folks, but I found out about 6 o'clock in the morning on the 12th. So I always look at September 11 with kind of mixed feelings. There's the sadness and the solemnness of what happened in New York and in Shanksville and at the Pentagon, but there's also a joy that it brings. And I had the pleasure, actually, I've already been to East Lansing and back this morning and had breakfast with that daughter who's a sophomore at Michigan State University and reminded her of that 19 years ago today was the day that we got her picture and her biography.
395-1450. Good morning. You're on the line with attorney Nathan Bocks.
Yeah, I hesitate to lay this on you, Nathan. You seem like a very nice and good person, and I assume a good lawyer. And I don't mean this to be directed at you, but when I look over my contact with lawyers going back and in another state from the time I was a child on a custody issue and so forth, out of about 7 lawyers, I would say that perhaps most of them were incompetent. One was charged with embezzlement. Another one was having trouble with Alzheimer's. But when you list on the list of honesty of professions and socioeconomic status, lawyers end up just, I think, one slot above used car lawyers, used car salesmen. And I'm wondering what can be done. Why is your profession not you personally, not respected or not trusted as others? For instance, nurses are rated number 1. They're way up there. Elementary school teachers are way up there, but lawyers are way down there. And what can be done in your profession to correct that?
Yeah. Let's see what good response, Nathan.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I've got some friends who are used car salesmen, so I always like to try to elevate them as much as I possibly can. But kidding aside, you're exactly right. The reputation of lawyers has not been great over the generations. I think that there may be more lawyer jokes out there than just about any other kind of professional joke that there is. I can only speculate on why that may be. And one of the first things that comes to mind is oftentimes we as lawyers are dealing with people at some of the most difficult and low points in their lives. And, you mentioned child custody. We talk about divorce. Gary, you mentioned criminal issues, bankruptcy issues. Generally, people are not excited about the prospect of dealing with lawyers. For about 10 years, I shared an office building with the dentist's office. And I said, people go to see their dentist every 6 months. They usually come to see a lawyer only when they absolutely have to, or every 10 or 20 years. So I always figured I was about 20 times less popular than going and getting a root canal. I think that while that reputation may be true, nationwide or worldwide, one of the things that I found in our community is that people have a very high regard for the lawyers that live here. And maybe that also is part of that idea of, everybody hates Congress, but they love their own congressman. Everybody hates lawyers, but they really like their own lawyer because their own lawyer's a good guy. We have tried very hard in the profession to raise that image as much as possible. And I'm very proud to say most of my clients have, after they've sat down and met with me for a time or two, say, you're not like any lawyer we ever met or ever thought we would meet. And I think that's because I try to take a very personal interest in my clients. Many of my clients have become friends over the years, and I've retained clients. I've been in practice now for 28 years. I have some that I can go all the way back to day one that we've continued working with, and I get the chance to see and interact with throughout the year. So we still obviously have some work to do, but I think that the reputation of our local lawyers is really very good.
Thank you.
I appreciate the call. 395-1450, 395-1450. I'll follow up a little bit with this, Nathan, because an attorney, a barrister, counselor, whatever term you want to use that, for the most part, you have to be a fighter. You have to fight for your clients. You have to fight for their legal rights. Sometimes people get rubbed the wrong way because a fighter will rub people the wrong way. There's, of course, like any human endeavor, Nathan, a case where there are unscrupulous characters, and it stains the entire profession. Those who are hired and retained to look for loopholes, to look for legal ways to get around certain things. And, to a certain extent, there's the image of Satan being an attorney. The classic The Devil and Daniel Webster short story from many years ago, where Satan was trying to get Daniel Webster's soul by, as a barrister himself. So it's not from this generation or even a few generations going back. It's something, unfortunately, that goes back, centuries in that regard.
Yeah, I always say it's wonderful to be here, Gary, but this is this is an interesting morning. I put lawyers in two basic categories. When people ask, what do you do? And I say, well, in my mind, there are two kinds of lawyers. There are the problem preventer lawyers, and there are the problem resolver lawyers. And so when you're talking about the fighters and the barristers and the ones that are in there mixing it up, those are the problem resolver lawyers. I actually fall into the other category. What I like to say is a problem preventer lawyer. With the estate planning that I do, with the small business work that I do, with the real estate work that I do, I'm generally helping people try to find ways to prevent problems from occurring down the line. I haven't seen the inside of a courtroom now in several years, and actually haven't seen one regularly for almost 10 years now, because I found that my personality was just not the type that was interested in mixing it up and fighting over the minutia of things. I like to try to get problems resolved quickly if we can. But then I found I was actually much more inclined and much happier when I was dealing with situations where I was looking down the road for folks and saying, what things might go wrong and how can we try to prevent those things from going wrong as early as we possibly can. And I do think that a lot of the bad reputation comes from the problem resolver types. As I said, when people are involved in a criminal matter or getting sued or having to sue somebody, that's when they get those bad reputations that are out there. I also joke that there typically aren't TV shows made about lawyers like me. The ones that you see on TV are the criminal lawyers or the divorce lawyers, and the ones that have what I would refer to as a more exciting lawyer life. But I find my job incredibly rewarding because I get to sit down with people, not necessarily at the worst times of their lives, but at times when they're trying to make their lives and the lives of their families better.
He is Nathan Bocks. He is with Central Park Law here in Holland. And by the way, we will put a link to centralpark.law when we put our podcast of our chat with Nathan at on our website at WHTC.com a little bit later on. 395-1450, 395-1450. If you have a question for Nathan, he'll be happy to answer it. And by the way, the meter is not running. Now, I'll bring this up. To a certain extent, you're involved with this. And we will talk about estates. We will talk about probate. We will talk about dealing with the loss of a loved one, sometimes suddenly, sometimes, the final step. It's a long illness, and you have a chance to be able to work with it. Full disclosure. Earlier this year, Holly lost her stepdad. We lost Mr. Don. He had been in somewhat of ill health, but it was somewhat sudden. 10 years ago yesterday, I lost my dad. But his situation was a lingering illness. Basically, he slipped away from us, did not regain consciousness for the last 6 months. When you are meeting with clients I will put my dad's situation. If our family came to your firm or to a similar firm saying we need to settle my dad's estate, he's in his last days. We don't know if he's going to be up and all that. I don't want you to go through all the steps, but what things would you try to emphasize to family members in order to get the affairs in order so that when the passing does come, they're ready for it?
Certainly. And Gary, I'm not sure I knew about either one of those. So my best wishes to you and your family on those losses. It's never easy. I deal with those kinds of situations and help people through those kinds of losses on a daily basis. It can be one of the most difficult times. One of the first things that I try to stress with clients, and in most cases this is happening already, but I always like to make that point, is the more cooperation there is between the family members, the more the family members are able to get along with one another, the better off it's going to be for everybody. Especially when you're dealing with a parent that's passed away and you're dealing with a group of siblings. No one knows how to push each other's buttons more than siblings. They've lived together, they grew up together, they know what can be done to pester one another. And I try to get them as much as possible. If I'm seeing any sort of animosity there, I try to get them to set that aside and say, let's focus on what the important issues are here. And then the next step is, as much as we possibly can, we want to try to avoid the probate court system. I really like the probate court judge. Judge Fine is great. The clerks that are at the probate court are great. But I only half jokingly say, if I never had to deal with the probate court again, I'd be a very happy man. And it is all completely avoidable. So what we're looking at doing is doing our best to get not only documentation in place, but also making sure that financial accounts are titled correctly so that we can avoid that probate court as much as possible. And at the same time, make sure we are accomplishing the goals of the person who is passing away. What is it that they want? What do they want to have happen with their finances, but also what do they want to see in regard to the family? Because oftentimes the documentation I'm putting together is the last message that person is going to be giving to their family. We often think about, oh, it's just a will or it's just a trust. Well, it is actually a statement. It's a statement of priorities. What was important to that person? And estate planning is priority setting. What's the first most important thing that you want to make sure that you accomplish, and the message that you want to send? And if we're able to accomplish that, what's the next most important thing that we do? And so a lot of my work with clients, and I like to refer to myself as an attorney and counselor rather than attorney and barrister, because I'm not before the bar very often, but I am a counselor quite often. Essentially on a daily basis, I'm counseling people in the ways to do things. And while my job isn't to tell people what to do, my job is to provide them with options, show them what it is that they can do, and then try to help them find the answers that make the most sense for them based on their particular situation.
And of course, the situations with my dad, nuclear family, we were, there was no issues. With Mr. Don, yes, he was married once before, and fortunately there wasn't the issues with my mother-in-law in the middle of it, being with the children from a first marriage, and then picking up the stepchildren when Mr. Don married my mother-in-law, and there was not that animosity. Thank goodness we didn't have that.
And those blended families add an additional layer of complication, potentially at least. We're always looking at what assets are there, what are the relationships between the family, and what are the relationships of the assets to the family. One of the things that we have a lot in West Michigan are family cottages, or the family camp that has been in the family for 50 years or maybe multiple generations. And how does the passing of those assets, because it's not as simple as, for most people, it's not as simple as, well, here's a bank account and there are 4 kids, let's pay the bills and divide things 4 ways. There tend to be assets, and sometimes the largest asset of the estate can be something that has a whole lot of sentimental value to members of the family. And where the issues tend to arise are not those items of cash or liquid assets, but those things that have sentimental value. I've seen people get riled up over the beanbag chair because that was the chair that every one of the kids wanted to sit in when they were growing up. If you tried to sell it at a yard sale, you couldn't get $10 for it, but it's something that that people are willing to die on that last hill for. Divorce attorneys often say it all comes down to $100 and a dog, and the same kind of thing can happen with an estate as well. And so we try to guide clients in a way that prevents those kinds of things from happening, because while assets are temporary, relationships can be forever. And I really try to get my clients to understand that you're going to have to sit at the Thanksgiving table with these folks again. You probably want to make those holiday gatherings as pleasant as you possibly can. Don't burn those bridges now if you don't have to.
We've touched upon this before in the past, Nathan, and I know you've counseled in this regard because you work also with businesses in some of their legal things, not only incorporation, setting up their businesses so that they can legally operate within the municipality that they are in, and the type of work that they are doing. You don't handle licensing, do you?
Not very often. Most of the licensing is done at the state level. While the city does issue some licenses for some businesses, most of that is pretty straightforward things. Okay,
I just didn't know whether or not, as an attorney, you would counsel them about how to go through the process with the licensing.
I've walked a few through the liquor licensing process, but there are also consultants out there that do a better job even than I do with that. So I'm usually handing them off to somebody who's a specialist in that area as well.
The other side too, Nathan, when a business decides to close its doors, it just can't say, "Well, we're closed. Goodbye. We're done." You got to tidy up some loose ends in that regard.
There definitely, and while that's actually in a lot of cases not a difficult process from a legal standpoint, unless there are lots of employees involved, those kinds of things, there are often more accounting issues that come in with that. The area that we can get involved pretty heavily with is if a business is transitioning from one owner to another, whether that's an outright sale to a different party who's going to be running the business, whether that means one of the partners or one of the owners taking on more ownership interest if somebody wants to retire, for instance. or also, and this is where both the estate planning and the small business issues overlap one another pretty significantly, is if a business is transitioning from one generation to another. And of all of those transitions, that last one is probably the most complicated. And it's because it's no longer now a straight business transaction. It is also a family and an emotional transaction that goes along with it. That if you're moving a business from parents to children, the question always arises: is it just one or a few of the children, or are all of the children involved in this process? And it's very quick to see where those relationship ties may not be as strong as people thought that they were. I've had some very long and interesting and even tear-filled conversations with clients when talking about that transition from one generation to another. We advise clients to start thinking about this process as early as possible. I even talk to clients about business transitions as they're forming the business. When they're first putting it together, especially if there's more than one person that's going to be involved in the ownership, I'd say you need to talk about what's going to happen if one of you passes away, or if one of you decides you no longer want to be part of this business for one reason or another. What does that mean for the other owners of the business and the family members of the other owners of the business? Because one of the biggest problems that we can have is if you have, say, two people working together, operating a business, and it takes both of them to run that business day to day, and then one of them passes away. What does that mean for the business?
It's not an easy question. Unfortunately, we got to get to work, as they say. Nathan Bocks from Central Park Law, thank you very much for joining us today on Talk of the Town for the Ask the Attorney segment. Look forward to chatting with you again, if not in November for the Ask the Attorney segment, but also talk to you as the other half as the mayor of Holland. Thank you, Nathan.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you very much. Says Nathan Bocks on 99.7 and 1450 WHTC. CBS News is next on the hour.